So the second thing that we're going to talk about tonight is the huge winter storm that we just had, that has been sweeping all across central and western Canada and the Midwestern United States, and has now moved to actually the east United States, like eastern United States as well. But yeah, I think you two both live in Calgary, Alberta. I live in Ontario, so I had the pleasure of avoiding the worst of that winter storm that just passed. But yeah, I know you guys in Calgary got hit with negative 40 degrees Celsius weather.
Yeah.
And actually, negative 40 degrees is the same in Celsius and Fahrenheit. So I don't have to convert the temperature there. So negative 40 degrees Celsius and Fahrenheit, um, which
It's
is
quite
pretty
warm,
cold.
you know.
Oh, it's certain things is warm. Okay.
Yeah, it's
Apparently
still
it's
warm.
not cold enough. Yeah, so there's in particular, I just wanted to touch upon two topics in particular about the winter storm, which is number one, I think it goes to underscore kind of the housing crisis that's happening here in Canada. And I was curious to hear what you guys think about it, because there was a recent report on BNN Bloomberg, which is kind of a Canadian version of Bloomberg, I guess, where they put out this report saying that the average house price in Canada has hit 750,000 Canadian dollars, and the average price of a home in Toronto and Vancouver are both over 1 million Canadian dollars. So the average, and the average household income of around just under 80,000 Canadian dollars per household, you can only afford a $315,000 home with a max insured mortgage of $300,000. So that's kind of the gravity of the situation in terms of our housing crisis. And the reason why it's related to the winter storm is that unfortunately, we also, because of this housing crisis, homelessness is becoming a huge problem. And unfortunately, if you're stuck outside when it's negative 40, that could be deadly. So I just wanted to get you guys' thoughts on the housing crisis. How bad do you think it is? Is it being sensationalized, or is it actually really bad? And if it is actually really bad, do you have any ideas on how we as a country can fix this issue? Because I think this is particularly an issue in Canada, but I think folks in the United States can kind of sympathize with this as well, because it's a problem to a lesser extent in the United States. But here in Canada, I really do think it's really bad. But what do you guys think?
Me or you first, gosh.
All right. Well, the housing crisis. Oh, one of my favorite topics. Yeah, it's a hot mess in Canada. There's basically no way that the average person can afford a house in one of the two major cities, like the most desirable, like Toronto and Vancouver. There's basically no way that the average person can afford that on an average salary. You have to be making an absurd amount of money over the average to be able to afford it, right? Which is a serious problem, because most people, they want to be able to build their wealth somehow, and one of the best ways to do that is through real estate. And if you can never get the opportunity to own real estate, you have no opportunity to build wealth, especially when the inflation rate is calling the value of your dollar down, so that even when you're working and producing money, the value of that money is dropping. So it's very difficult, because the way I see it is you can't really stay in these major cities because of the fact that the cost of living has risen too much, and that's also a disadvantage for those places, because they'll be pricing out a lot of their younger and productive members of society. So, and then at the same time, obviously we're having the increase in the homeless population, because people are just getting priced out of everything. So it's a giant mess.
Yeah. So do you have any ideas how we could go about fixing it, right? Because let's say if you were the prime minister of Canada, like what would you do? Like, do you have some policies in mind that you think that could help?
I think I know where this is going. I guess we have to build more houses. I think there's a few things that are going on. So I hope this isn't like cancel or like or like whatever. Anyway, but I think a lot of international students from abroad are coming into Canada and they're trying to go here for school and just like working and things like this. But I think the huge issue is that there's not enough houses to facilitate for all these different people. So like I feel like that could contribute to why everything's becoming so expensive. Obviously, there's other like specific reasons too, but if you're in Toronto and Vancouver, there's no way that you'll be able to afford a house if you're in our age demographic group. It's just impossible unless you're making a substantial amount, which is kind of why we're here in Calgary. But even in Calgary too, it's like getting pretty expensive. I'm sure Tristan knows this pretty well.
Yeah.
For
For those of audience members that don't know, both Dominic and Tristan are also originally from Ontario.
Right. Yes.
So
very expensive.
Yeah, I think I would venture a guess as to say that the like more affordable housing in Calgary is a large part of the reason why you guys decided to move there.
It was very convincing. The fact that you could that it went from being the options was basically never buy a house in Ontario or buy a house in Calgary.
I mean,
when the calculus is that, I mean, it really makes the decision a lot easier.
I mean,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
What do you guys think? Like policies again? Let's go back to policies. Like, if you were prime minister, what would you do? Like, how do we dig ourselves out of this hole?
I feel
there's definitely a demand and a supply side of this. From the supply side, we clearly have too few houses for the number of people that want to live, obviously.
Exactly.
And there are ways for the government to try and mitigate that through, introduction of public, enforcing or not enforcing necessarily, but encouraging the growth of like more affordable housing and also like more like condos and stuff, like more not necessarily condos, but like more packed in people. I'm blanking on what the term.
Multi-family units. And stuff
Yeah,
like
that's what I'm getting at. Encouraging the development of those over single family homes. So doing repurposing the tax, like the areas into more multi-factor, multivariable places. So I think that would also help. And then from a demand side, well, there are ways to reduce the demand. Having our immigration at all-time highs is not going to help the demand, because obviously the more people that come in, they need houses. We need houses. People are already here. They need a house. The immigrants, they need a house. So you're going to be running into a scenario where there's already not enough houses, and we're having more people come in to a place that has no houses.
Exactly.
So it's difficult, because it's like some of the arguments that I've heard for this is that the immigrants will help build the houses, or to something to that effect, like that they're a net gain for our society, which they are, but we're not necessarily, the way our immigration system works, it doesn't encourage the people who will have the skills to build the houses. It encourages much higher education, who are not going to want to build the houses. So it's a lot of people who are not going to be able to assist with that supply side issue.
Yeah, so you're essentially saying we're letting in too many consultants. Not enough
construction workers.
Yeah. I wouldn't say necessarily consultants, but we're letting in a lot of people like doctors, and then not letting them practice as doctors, and then they can't practice as doctors, but they still don't want to be construction workers, you know?
Yeah, and we just have a whole bunch of, former doctors working at Tim Hortons, and that's the issue.
I mean, we have a health problem, like a healthcare problem too, you know? We don't have enough doctors at the same time, so, maybe they should be doctors.
You know, that's a good point, because I was talking to one of my friends earlier, and he's like Egyptian, so he's like his family's from Egypt, and his dad is a doctor. But his dad's like, certification. He went to school in Egypt and all that stuff, and they don't recognize that certification when he immigrated to Canada. So it's like, he had to go through schooling again, even though he's been in the practice for like decades before he came to Canada. And even after he finished his schooling, apparently they like put him to like just regular residency when he was actually a surgeon back in Egypt. So it's like they didn't allow him to practice his specialty, even though he finished school, and like even though he finished school in Egypt, and they made him redo some programs in Canada, and even then he couldn't practice as a surgeon.
Well, it's like, why are we encouraging people like surgeons to move to Canada and then going, just kidding, your credentials aren't good enough for us? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me, right? Like, why wouldn't, if we're going to be encouraging them, why are we not accepting at least some of the credentials? Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. So Don, what do you think?
Oh, like in general? Yeah, no, it's a whole hiccup. You can argue that maybe we should pause on immigration just a little bit, because I think what it is the government needs to take care of us before we can take care of others, because I think the surplus of supply and demand is just nuts. Hopefully we can find a way to take care of us, and yeah, it's really complicated. That's all I'll say for now.
Yeah, and I hate how this like topic has become somewhat polarized in kind of Canadian society today. So for those of you who aren't Canadian and maybe watching from other countries, you might not know this, but like Canada, its government right now under our beloved Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is like very staunchly pro-immigration, and I have no issue with that particularly, but
Me too.
it's just you can be staunchly pro-immigration, but some things still has to make sense, right? Like I think it's irresponsible to bring in a bunch of immigrants but have no plan on how to house them, and also if you bring in too many people, there is such a thing as bringing in too many people, right? I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't bring in anybody. I myself and my family are immigrants to Canada. Originally, I was born in China, actually. So, as I'm speaking as a first generation immigrant, that, as an immigrant, I would like to see Canada have the infrastructure and have the practical capacity to take care of immigrants, and not just kind of just abandon you once you land. Right. And I think this goes to show, I saw an interview with our deputy prime minister. So a deputy prime minister is kind of like the vice president, I guess, sort of equivalent. Our deputy prime minister, her name is Chrystia Freeland. And they interviewed Freeland, and they asked her, should Canada adjust the immigration policy? And basically her response is no, our immigration policy is fine, and Canada has the social capacity to take care of the immigrants that we bring in. And I think that's just very tone deaf, because like nobody's debating on whether a Canadian have the social capacity to take in immigrants, but social capacity does not put food on the table, right? Like we can be as welcoming and cheer for immigrants as much as we want, but that doesn't solve the housing crisis. That doesn't put food on the table. That doesn't guarantee them jobs once they get here. So I think the question that the government is not asking is, do we have the practical capacity to bring in immigrants? And this is just something that our current government just completely doesn't understand.
It's also the number of immigrants as well, because like we've increased the number dramatically over the last few years, and the question is that the housing crisis has been getting worse. So why are we speeding up immigration at the same time that the cost of living and our housing market is getting completely unaffordable for everyone, including the immigrants who are immigrating here? So
can I just add one more thing too? I'm very like pro immigration. Like we're all like I'm from an immigrant family that came to Canada. Like it's good to come here for opportunities, but when there's like a floor front of us, it's hard to support everyone, right? So perhaps a pause and just like slowing down the immigration process would be good for Canadians, just so we can catch up a bit more. And then sometime in the near future, these immigrants can come into our country just like everyone else and be treated as equals. Just want to say that so I don't get canceled. But
yeah, no, for sure. So yeah, the fact that like you're afraid of getting canceled just for saying that, just for saying something that, in my opinion, is very practical, just goes to show that the political discourse around this issue here in Canada is completely unhinged, and it's a shame. I don't know how else to describe it.
It's amusing because I'm also from an immigrant family, so
yeah, like, and that's the thing, right? A lot of people think that like just because you're white, like you have no like right to speak on the immigration issue. It's like, white people can be immigrants too. Did you know that, right? Like I don't think like people don't really understand that, and that's part of the problem, right? And it's like, technically we're all immigrants at some point unless you're native, right? So